My son-in-law changed the locks and tried to steal our family farm. He had no idea my late husband had already checkmated him. The call came as I was helping my brother, Arthur, out of his wheelchair and into his favorite armchair. His movements were stiff and pained, the result of a bad fall that had fractured his hip. The physical therapist had warned us the recovery would be slow and agonizing, but neither of us was prepared for the sheer, day-to-day difficulty of it. When my phone rang, I almost let it go to voicemail. Reception in this rural corner of Kentucky was spotty at best, but a twist in my gut, a mother's intuition perhaps, made me hurry to answer. "Mom?" My daughter's voice was fractured, broken by static. "Mom, can you hear me?" "Clara, you're breaking up." "Honey, where are you?" "He changed the locks." Her words dissolved into a hiss of interference, then snapped back with terrifying clarity. 6 hours in the rain. A cold, heavy stone settled in my stomach. "Clara, where are you calling from? What happened?" The connection stabilized, as if the universe itself recognized the gravity of the moment. The feed and seed. "Mom, Mark changed the locks on the house." Her voice broke, a sound that tore at me across the miles. "I've been locked out since this morning," he said. "He said we don't live there anymore. You and me. We don't live there anymore." I closed my eyes. The pieces clicked into place with a terrible, final certainty. The late-night phone calls Mark had been making when he thought Clara was asleep. His parents' short visit that had somehow stretched from a weekend to 3 weeks. The increasingly dismissive tone in his texts when I'd asked about the farm's upkeep from Arthur's sickbed. "Are you somewhere dry now?" I kept my voice calm, decades of managing farm crises serving me well. "Yes. Old Mr. Higgins let me use the store phone and gave me some soup. My car is still dead. I had to walk 3 miles in the storm to get here." "Is Mark still at the house?" "Him and his parents. They watched me from the window, Mom. For hours, they watched me standing in the rain, and nobody came out until it was dark." The raw hurt in her voice was a physical ache in my chest. My strong, capable daughter, reduced to seeking charity at the local feed store. "Mark finally came out and said they'd had a family meeting and decided we were done. That you'd abandoned the place by coming to help Uncle Arthur, and I wasn't contributing enough to deserve to stay." "I see." My voice sounded strange to my own ears, too measured for the inferno of fury building inside me. "What do I do, Mom? All our things are in there. My clothes, my laptop with all my freelance work, Grandpa's pocket watch. Everything. He won't even let me get my stuff." I looked over at Arthur, who was watching me with sharp concern, despite his own pain. My older brother, always the fighter, always charging headlong into a problem, while I, Eleanor, had always been the strategist, the one who found the quiet, surgical solution. "Listen carefully, Clara," I said, my mind clicking into a cold, clear gear. "Go to the Pineview Lodge on County Road 12. Ask for Doris at the front desk. Tell her you're Eleanor Vance's daughter, and you need the storm cellar. She'll understand." "The storm cellar? Mom, I'm not. It's what we call it, honey. It's a room your father and I kept there for years. Paid up through 2035. You have a motel room? Why would you? Your father didn't trust banks entirely, not after his family lost their first farm in the 80s farm crisis. We kept certain things in places nobody would think to look." I smiled faintly, remembering Henry and his endless contingency plans. "Get yourself warm and dry. There's cash in the bedside table and a change of clothes that should fit you." "Mom, I don't understand any of this." "You will." I glanced at my watch. I had about an hour before the law offices closed on the West Coast. "I need to make some calls. Stay at the lodge tonight and call me from the landline there." "What about Mark in the house?" "Mom, that's our home. Everything we have is there." "Not everything, Clara," I said, my voice dropping to a whisper. "Not by a long shot." A plan was already forming in my mind, built on foundations my late husband Henry had laid years ago. "Trust me, for 3 days. Can you do that?" "Yes." Her voice steadied, grasping the lifeline I was throwing. 3 days. "I trust you." After reassuring her and disconnecting, I turned to Arthur. "Henry's plan?" he asked simply, his voice a low rumble. I nodded. "It seems my son-in-law has decided to claim our family's property for himself." "Always thought he was a vulture," Arthur grunted, attempting to sit up straighter and wincing. "Need me to make calls?" "I can't walk worth a damn, but my phone finger still works." "No," I said, squeezing his hand. "This is my fight. You rest." In the quiet of Arthur's living room, I found a spot with slightly better reception and dialed a number I knew by heart but hadn't called in years. "Bennett and Crow, how may I direct your call?" "Charles Crow, please." "Tell him it's Eleanor Vance." A brief hold, then a familiar, measured voice. "Eleanor? Is that really you?" "Hello, Charles. It's time to open Henry's envelope. A moment of profound silence. The sealed instructions? Eleanor, he made me promise those were only for a situation where the property is under direct threat. That's exactly what's happened, Charles. My son-in-law has changed the locks and declared that my daughter and I no longer have rights to our home. His tone shifted instantly from nostalgic to razor-sharp and professional. I'll retrieve the documents from the vault. Where can I reach you in an hour? I gave him Arthur's information and hung up, my hand steady. Henry had been gone 6 years, but his foresight was about to become our salvation. My quiet, brilliant husband, who could sense a drought coming long before the fields cracked, had prepared for this exact scenario. Mark had never understood who he was dealing with. He saw an aging widow, too sentimental about an old farm, too accommodating of a daughter who'd returned home after her tech startup in Louisville faltered. He looked at our weathered farmhouse, the big red barn, the 200 acres of prime Kentucky pasture and woodland, and saw dollar signs. Developers had been circling our county for years, buying up family land for sprawling subdivisions. What Mark didn't see, what Henry had carefully ensured no one would see, was the intricate legal fortress that protected our land. My husband hadn't just been a country lawyer. He'd been a Yale-educated legal scholar who'd specialized in estate law before returning home to protect rural families from precisely the kind of predation my son-in-law was now attempting. Charles called back, right on schedule. Eleanor, I've opened the envelope. Henry left remarkably detailed instructions. I've never seen a more comprehensive contingency plan. That was Henry, I said, pride and grief mingling in my chest. What's our first move? I'm filing emergency injunctions tonight. Then, first thing tomorrow, I'll send certified letters to every address associated with the property. He paused. Eleanor, did you know about the second property? The one in Colorado? I smiled, though he couldn't see it. Of course, Charles. Who do you think helped Henry pick it out? And the water rights leases, the renewable energy shares. It was all part of our retirement plan. Mark just forced us to accelerate the timeline. After finishing with Charles, I called Clara at the lodge. Her voice was stronger. The simple security of a warm room working wonders. Mom, this room is full of filing cabinets. There's a safe. What is all this? That's your father's backup office. The beginning of our response. I settled into Arthur's worn armchair. Now listen carefully. Tomorrow, Charles is sending a very special letter to Mark. But before it arrives, I need you to do exactly as I say. As I outlined the first phase of Henry's plan to our daughter, a calm certainty settled over me. Mark thought he'd won by changing a few locks. He had no idea what was coming. Just tell me one thing, Mom, Clara said as our call wound down. Are we going to get our home back? Oh, sweetheart, I replied, the first hint of steel entering my voice. We're going to get so much more than that. 3 days can feel like an eternity when you're plotting justice. I spent them divided between Arthur's bedside and his quiet porch, my phone pressed to my ear as I executed Henry's long-dormant contingency plan. Charles Crowe proved as meticulous as I remembered, methodically activating the legal mechanisms Henry had established. The certified letters will arrive today, Charles confirmed during our morning call. Sheriff Miller will deliver the primary notice personally. And he understands the situation? I asked. I've known Ben Miller since he was in diapers. His family still owns the orchard your husband kept from bankruptcy in '02. He'll handle it with the appropriate gravity. I allowed myself a small, cold smile. Small towns have long memories, and the Millers weren't the only family Henry had helped. Clara's in position? Charles asked. Yes. She's watching from the Higgins place above the feed and seed. Old man Higgins, whose grocery tab Henry had quietly covered for a year after his wife passed, had given Clara use of his upstairs apartment and a pair of binoculars. Perfect. And Eleanor, are you sure you don't want to be there? You have every legal right. No, I said firmly. I want Mark to receive that letter without me present. I want him to have time to understand exactly what's happening before I return. What I didn't say was that I needed these days to master my anger, to transform my white-hot fury into the cold, calculated response Henry would have advised. Revenge was a poor motivation, he always said. Justice, protection, and rightful restoration were sturdier foundations. By mid-afternoon, my phone buzzed with a text from Clara. Sheriff's car just turned onto our road. It's happening. I imagined the scene. Sheriff Miller's cruiser crunching up the gravel drive, Mark's confusion, the certified letter changing hands. The document itself was deceptively simple. 3 pages of legal language that would systematically dismantle my son-in-law's premature victory celebration. Clara's updates arrived in quick succession. Sheriff stayed for 20 minutes. Mark was waving his arms around. Mark's parents came outside. They look upset. Mark is on his phone, pacing the porch. His dad just left in their car, driving fast. I shared these with Arthur, who listened with grim satisfaction. Wish I could see his face, he muttered. Bet it looks like old man Turner's did when the court told him he couldn't divert the creek anymore. Around dinner time, Charles called. Letter delivered and received. Sheriff Miller says your son-in-law turned, and I quote, the color of old milk when he got to page 2. Page 2 contained the nuclear option. The Vance family farm wasn't owned by me, as Mark had assumed. Henry had placed it in an irrevocable family trust 15 years ago, with complex provisions, making it impossible to sell without unanimous agreement from all trustees, myself, Clara, and the trust's administrator, Charles Crow. What about the developers? I asked. We'd been fielding increasingly aggressive offers from Blue Ridge Properties. Interesting timing, Charles replied. I received a call from their legal department an hour ago. Apparently they've been in negotiations with Mark for weeks. They were under the impression he had authority to sell. The preliminary agreement he signed specified 50 acres initially, with an option for the remaining land, once the elderly mother-in-law situation was resolved. I closed my eyes, absorbing this final betrayal. He wasn't just stealing our home. He was planning to erase our family's century-old connection to the land. The gardens where I'd taught Clara to plant tomatoes, the oak grove where Henry's ashes were scattered, the meadow where generations of Vance children had learned to ride. Their legal team is understandably concerned, now that they've learned about the trust, Charles continued. I made it clear any agreements signed by Mark are completely invalid. Good. Has he tried contacting Clara? Multiple texts and calls. She's maintaining radio silence, as advised. This had been the hardest part for Clara, ignoring all communication from Mark, no matter how desperate or apologetic. Her compassionate nature made her vulnerable to manipulation, a quality Mark had exploited throughout their marriage. Keep the pressure on, I said. I'll be home tomorrow. The familiar rhythm of tires on gravel announced my return home after 97 days away. Charles had offered to drive me from the airport, but I'd rented a car. This homecoming needed to be on my terms. Clara waited at the end of our long driveway. When I pulled up, she slipped into the passenger seat without a word. Are they inside? I asked. Just his parents. Mark hasn't come back since he got the letter. We didn't knock. The solid oak front door, carved by Henry's grandfather, was still ours. I used my key. Voices from the kitchen fell silent as we stepped into the hallway. My boots echoed on the hardwood floors. Henry had refinished himself. Hello, Barbara. Hello, Richard, I said, my voice carrying into the kitchen. I believe you're sitting in my house. They froze. Barbara with a glass of my blackberry wine halfway to her lips. Richard with a plate of the last of the honey-baked ham I'd left in the freezer. Eleanor, Barbara recovered first, setting down her glass with forced casualness. We weren't expecting you back so soon. How's your brother? Improving, thank you. Though I'm surprised you'd ask, given that you and Richard have decided Clara and I don't live here anymore. Richard shifted uncomfortably. Now, Eleanor, there's been a misunderstanding. Mark was upset. Is that what you call changing locks and leaving your daughter-in-law in the rain for 6 hours? I kept my tone conversational as I opened the refrigerator, noting the depletion of my carefully stocked meals. A misunderstanding. She could have gone to a neighbor's, Barbara said dismissively. Our closest neighbor is 4 miles away, as you well know. I interrupted. And responsibility is precisely what I'd like to discuss. I took 2 crystal glasses, wedding gifts from my mother, and poured water for Clara and myself. The domesticity of the gesture unnerved them further. We understand Mark received some sort of legal notice, Richard ventured. Yes, a courtesy explanation of the property's actual ownership structure. I sat at the head of the table, Henry's old place, which Richard had apparently claimed. He shifted awkwardly to another seat. I believe it clarified certain misconceptions. Ridiculous legal nonsense, Barbara declared. Mark's attorneys assure him that document won't hold up. You can't just change ownership retroactively. The Vance family trust was established 15 years ago, Barbara. There's nothing retroactive about it. Where is Mark? Clara asked, speaking for the first time. He's in Lexington, Richard said, consulting with legal experts. Interesting, I remarked, because Sheriff Miller mentioned seeing him check into the Mountain View Motel this morning. Another telling glance between the Prescotts. Mark had abandoned his parents to face the music. Well, we'll be joining him shortly, Barbara announced, gathering her purse with theatrical dignity. We certainly don't feel welcome here. That's your choice, I said calmly. Though I should mention Sheriff Miller will be returning tomorrow to inventory the property, given the unauthorized removal of Clara's possessions. This stopped Barbara mid-rise. What unauthorized removal? My clothes, my laptop, Grandpa's watch, Clara listed flatly, all missing from my room. Mark may have packed some things, Richard admitted reluctantly, for safekeeping. Theft is the legal term, I corrected. But we're giving him the opportunity to return everything before pressing charges. Barbara's face flushed crimson. Pressing charges against your own son-in-law? The laugh that escaped me held no humor. What exactly has Mark done for us, Barbara? besides attempting to steal our home and sell it to developers? Richard's head snapped up. Developers? Blue Ridge Properties, Clara supplied, her voice tight. He's been negotiating with them for weeks. Signed a preliminary agreement to sell 50 acres, with options for the rest once Mom was quote, dealt with. That's not. He wouldn't. Richard stammered. Barbara's pinched expression told me she'd known. The property is underutilized. Mark was exploring options to maximize its potential. That's just good business. By selling land he didn't own? That's not business, Barbara. That's fraud. You've always been unreasonably attached to this old place, she sniffed. It's falling apart. The smart move is selling before property values drop again. Then it's fortunate the decision isn't yours to make. I stood. Now, I've had a long journey. You have until noon tomorrow to remove your belongings. You can't just throw us out. Actually, I can. This is my property. But unlike your son, I'm giving you a reasonable time frame. The Prescotts departed in a flurry of muttered threats and slammed doors. When the sound of their engine faded, Clara and I stood in the sudden silence of our reclaimed kitchen. They'll be back with Mark, Clara warned. I'm counting on it. I opened a drawer and removed the list I'd made during my midnight planning sessions. But first, we have work to do. The following morning, I led Clara to Henry's study, a room she'd rarely entered since his death. It still smelled of him. Old books, pipe tobacco, and lemon polish. Dad had a safe here all this time? She asked as I removed the framed diplomas from the wall. Your father believed in redundancy. The safe opened with a satisfying click. Inside were document folders and a small metal box. These contain the next phase of your father's plan. I handed her a folder labeled Secondary Property. Inside were photographs of a stunning Colorado ranch nestled against the Rocky Mountains. What is this place? The Vance Legacy Ranch, I replied. 2,000 acres outside Durango. Purchased 20 years ago through a separate family LLC, along with the water rights to another 3,000 adjacent acres, leased to a conservation trust. Her eyes widened. We own this? We do. The quarterly income has been reinvested through the trust. I opened the metal box, revealing flash drives and a sealed envelope with Clara's name. These contain the complete documentation, including the deed to a small commercial property in Lexington. Lexington? What does that? She stopped, the connection forming. The Mountain View Motel, where Mark's staying. It's adjacent to that property. Which means, I confirmed, every time Sheriff Miller visits him with another question, he's legally on Vance land. Your father would have appreciated the poetry. I handed her the envelope. This is for you. He prepared it during his final months. She read Henry's shaky handwriting, emotions playing across her face. Surprise, grief, determination. He says I'm to take charge of the Colorado property, that it's my inheritance, separate from the farm, established to ensure I'd always have security, regardless of my marriage. Henry believed in preparation, not pessimism. He hoped for the best while ensuring protection against the worst. The property has a guest house, she said softly. He says it's where you stayed, perfect for my mother in her later years. The familiar ache of missing Henry intensified. Even facing his own mortality, his thoughts were for our security. Your father understood the importance of choices, I said, of having options. Like the option of starting over in Colorado, Clara mused, the idea taking root. Away from all this, if that's what you want. But first we resolve the situation here. Mark's final, desperate counterattack came in the form of a lawsuit, accusing us of emotional distress and fraudulent misrepresentation. It was a baseless theatrical move, exactly as Henry had predicted. Charles dismantled it with surgical precision, presenting the ironclad trust documents that proved the Colorado property was Clara's separate inheritance, established years before she'd even met Mark. Faced with the complete collapse of his position, and with his own father withdrawing financial support, Mark had no choice but to capitulate. The divorce proceedings were swift and quiet. We dropped the criminal complaints regarding the stolen items. He dropped all claims to any Vance property. A year later, I stood on the wide porch of the Colorado ranch house, watching the sunset paint the Rockies in shades of rose and gold. Clara joined me, handing me a mug of tea. She had blossomed here, the strain of her marriage replaced by a quiet confidence. Charles called, she said. The transfer is complete. The Kentucky farm is officially part of an agricultural conservation trust. It can never be developed. Henry would be pleased, I said, satisfaction warming me. Preservation was always his priority. We had found our solution, preserving the Kentucky home forever while building new lives in Colorado. The farmhouse remained for our visits, but the land was now permanently protected. I heard from Richard Prescott, Clara mentioned. His divorce from Barbara is final. Mark moved to Tennessee. Apparently, Blue Ridge offered him a position after the Kentucky deal fell through. Distance suits them, I observed. The Prescott's retreat had been complete. Richard, in a surprising turn, had begun volunteering with a legal aid clinic, helping other landowners protect their property. He asked if he could use our case as an anonymous example in his work, Clara said. No names, just the legal structures Dad created. I think Henry would approve, I said. He always believed in education as the best defense. We sat in companionable silence. The Colorado property had proven to be everything Henry envisioned, not just a financial asset, but a place of healing and possibility. Clara was transforming part of it into an education center for sustainable ranching, incorporating design elements from Henry's study. She had not only preserved his legacy, but was building upon it. As the stars emerged over the mountains, I felt a profound sense of peace. Henry's foresight had given us more than just security. It had given us freedom and a future filled with purpose. He had protected what mattered most, not just the land, but the love and resilience that defined our family. We didn't live in the Kentucky farmhouse anymore, but we had carried its heart, its strength, and its memories with us. And in doing so, we had honored the magnificent legacy of the man who had thought of everything.